All right, good morning. Hope we can get off to a good start this week. I've been saving this for a good Monday so we can work on it all week. Today we're actually going to be working on what's called the quadratic formula. It looks big and ugly, and it will look confusing for the first day or so, but I promise after a few days of doing it, it's something that most high school students prefer doing instead of the other methods. And I'm going to go through with an explanation of what methods work when and pros and cons of each type of method. So far, to solve a quadratic equation, remember a quadratic equation is anything with x squared or higher. I've not given you any x to the thirds or x to the fourths. That's part of what we're losing out on. First, there are three types. You could use square roots. You could use factoring. This is the most common and, in my opinion, pretty easy, but it doesn't work every time. And you can use the quadratic formula. The positive side of the quadratic formula, it works on every single problem. The downside is, at the beginning, it's a little more time consuming and can be confusing until you get used to it. Okay? First, taking square roots. The square root method is nice and easy, but the problem is it only works when you have an n squared and no n term. Okay? The pros and cons is you have an x squared term, but there's no x to the first term. It cannot be used on any other problem except these kind, but it is easy to do, but it's very limited on when you can use it. Okay? This is when you move the 5 by adding, divide by 7, and then you take the square root. That's why it's called using square roots. Okay? But it can only be done on problems that have an n squared and no n. Okay? It cannot be done on this type of problem where we have an x squared and an x. It can't be done on this type of problem where we have an n squared and an n. Okay? So using square roots, that's what we did first. Only works when you have a squared and no n, and you just move it like you would 7th and 8th grade type math by adding 5, dividing by 7, and square rooting. Okay? So it's easier, but very limited on when it can work. Factoring is probably the most common, but it doesn't work every single time. The pros, fairly easy if you can factor well, but it does not work every time. I've been giving you problems that factor every single time. Okay? This one is a GCF, can factor. This one is a trinomial math game. Just do a quick one here. You basically pull out an x, and that leads to x equals 0 and x equals -6. Very quick and easy. This one factors using n minus 5, n plus 4. What multiplies to get 20, -20, but adds to -1. It's a -5 and a +4. So you factor it, then you set this factor equal to 0 and solve. Set this factor equal to 0 and solve. Okay, probably factoring is probably the quickest and easiest. One of the quickest and easiest, I should say. But it doesn't work every time. Had this number been a -18, this problem would not factor, and you wouldn't be able to get the answer using the factoring method. If this was like a -5 minus 20, -5n minus 20, it would not be factorable. I've been giving you specific problems that do factor, and when it does, it's a nice, easy problem. That's what we've been doing for the last week or so. But as soon as you change the problem to where it doesn't factor, you need a different method. And that method is called the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula has three parts to it, in my opinion. This part right here is the opposite of b, or negative b. If b is 7, this would mean -7. If b was -3, this would mean -3. I ought to back up in case you forget from last week. Remember, in standard form, you have ax squared plus bx plus c. That's where we get the a, b, and c from. Okay, a is what's being multiplied by the squared. B is what's being multiplied by the x. And c is the constant, or the number by itself. Okay, so in this problem here, a would be 7, b would be -6, c would be -20. Okay? So I want to explain the formula real quick, and then I'll do examples in a different video. First, whatever b is, this says take the opposite of it. Plus or minus means when you take the square root of something, you end up with two answers. Remember we said the square root of 25 is positive 5 and negative 5. In my examples, I'll explain this better. And I hope you recognize this. This is the b squared minus 4ac that we did last Wednesday and Friday. That's why we were doing it, to try to get you comfortable with that part of the formula. This is the most complicated part of the formula, but if you did Wednesday and Friday's homework, you should understand what to do with that. And then the denominator is just 2 times a. Okay, so I consider it 3 parts. Part 1, take the opposite of b. Part 2, find out what b squared minus 4ac is and put it underneath the square root. And then part 3 is just take 2 times a. I usually do these 2 parts first, and then I go to the side and find the math for this, just like Wednesday and Friday, and put it underneath. And then I'll show you what to do in the examples from there. So, quick recap. Using square roots only works when there's a squared term and no n. Just isolate by moving the 5, dividing, and then at the end you take the square root. The most common method is factoring. Problem is, factoring doesn't work every single time. This was a GCF and it worked fine. This was a trinomial math game that did factor fine. But in a problem like this is not something that factors, so we need a different method. Okay? Since you can't factor this, you need a different method, which is called the quadratic formula. And then this one is not easily factorable. It actually is factorable, I think, but it's not easily factorable. Okay? The quadratic formula works on all problems. At first, it's harder and more time-consuming until you get used to it. Most upper-level high school students use this method since it works on all problems. The reason why is by the time you figure out, hey, does this factor? And you spend a minute or two trying to figure out if this factor is using the hard math game, and then next thing you know, it doesn't, and you wasted your time. You could have already been halfway or most of the way done with the quadratic formula. Okay, so this video just was an explanation. I'm going to give you a second video where I will do 2 sample problems. I'm going to do 2 sample problems, and you will just have 2 problems on your assignment. Always check Canvas, and always check your school email, your Outlook school email, and I will provide all the information you need. Yep. Watch this video and then watch the example video. Bye.